Hey, Shalom Alechem, Erev Tov. We are finally back together in our Shiviti UK Expanding Horizons class. Just a few announcements. Tonight's shiur is dedicated in the memory of all of those who perished in the Holocaust. Yesterday was Yom HaShoah, and I didn't have a shiur yesterday, so today is the nearest shiur to that, and I'm praying to HaKadosh Baruch Hu that the Holocaust is something in our past, and it's not something that we need to consider seriously ever again for the future. But I can tell you, as a Jew, living in America, it has not been a very pleasant last few months, and their neshama should have Anaya and Gan Eden, B'ezrat Hashem Dvar. I also want to dedicate tonight's shiur to the Hatzlacha of my dear father. HaKadosh Baruch Hu should bless him with a lot of success and everything that he needs to accomplish this week. Where do we begin? We are in the Rabbi Shemtob on page, must be 31 in the Roman numerals or 29 in the PDF numbers. Did you see that? So it should be a file titled Rabbi Shemtob, volume 3, pages 1 to 30. I think is what it says. Before that, if I started with the Holocaust, so let me continue. I was once in Israel. I don't remember if I was riding in a car, I was in a bus looking out at the traffic. But I saw a bumper sticker. And the bumper sticker said, Im efshar lamut biyachad, if we can die together, as lama I efshar lichyot biyachad? Why are we unable to live together? And that bumper sticker always left an impression in my mind. What if we die together, we can't live together? And we know Jewish life is riddled with politics and controversy and differences of opinions and levels of religious observance or lack thereof. And the Jewish community seems to have 101 reasons to fight with each other and not to get along with each other. But at the end of the day, this bumper sticker was asking a deep question. Adolf Hitler, Yimach Shemo V'zichro, didn't come through Europe checking people's membership to the synagogue. Did they go? Did they not go? Where did they go? Were they Ashkenazim? Were they Sephardim? And yes, there were Sephardim in the Holocaust. Were they Orthodox? Were they Reform? Were they Conservative? Were they this? Were they that? They didn't care. Jews are Jews. And always when it comes to dying, somehow we're all Jewish enough for each other. When it comes to living, that's already when it gets complicated. The next two shiurim that we have together as we finish the introduction to Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine's book, Rabbi Shemtob Volume 3, is going to be about this painful separation that exists in the Jewish people. And the fact that for so much of Am Yisrael, the thought is that some miraculous Mashiach is going to fall out of the sky and heal all of the divides that we've spent so long creating. And that's why today's shiur was titled Mashiach Won't Help. Belief in a fantastical Mashiach has led to reluctance in dealing with raging issues headfirst. And to combat this, we must plan pragmatically and take responsibility for the Jewish future. And with that in mind, I ask you to join me in the next few sources. Before I bring you to the writings of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, I wanted to bring you first to the writings of a very special Chacham, whose few writings that I've come across have influenced me greatly. Not someone that I have his work in my home. It's almost impossible to find. If someone can find it, I'd be very grateful to you. His name was Rabbi Avraham Chacham. He was born to an Iranian Jewish family. That region is kind of transient, so he found himself to be the rabbi of the Urfuli community at a certain point, involved with the Bukharan community at a certain point. Rabbi Avraham Chacham was born in 1882 in Persia, in Iran. And he passed away in 1964, about 82 years later, in Israel. He was known as Mullah Avraham ben Azariah Chacham. Mullah is a title of respect. Rabbi Yosef from our Bedin, also his grandfather was also called Mullah. Alav Shalom. He writes the following, and I put out a PDF. It should be titled something like Rabbi Avraham Chacham Rabbinic Quotation. Something that looks like this. Do you see that in your attachments on the Zoom invitation? I want to read it together. The Prophet says, "V'hasiroti et shemot ha'be'alim mipiha, v'lo yizacheru od bishmam." In the original that I had, he switched those last two words. I took the liberty to switch them back, and forgive me if I did something wrong. "And I will remove the names of these idols, the Baalim, from her mouth, and no longer will they be known by the names of these idols." Says Rabbi Avraham Chacham, "אבל זה בא על שם הממלכות והארצות, שגלו ביניהם עם בני ישראל, כגון אשכנז, ספרד, איטליה." He said, we have adopted names of our exile. I have a shiur elsewhere called Jewish Stockholm Syndrome. We identify with the lands of our exiles, whether it's Ashkenaz, Germany, or Sepharad, or Spain, or Italia, or Italy, and you can make a list that will go on forever. Where did the Jews not go into Galut? Like we see with our own eyes. זה אומר מנהג אשכנזי, וזה אומר מנהג ספרדי. This one says it's an Ashkenazi minhag. This one says it's a Sephardic minhag. אחד אומר מנהג איטלקי. This one says an Italian minhag. I'm sure you know the Italians have a community of Romaniot that are even older than the Sephardic and Ashkenazi divides, perhaps. אחד אומר מנהג בבל. This one says an Iraqi minhag. אחד אומר מנהג פרס. It's a Persian minhag. אחד אומר מנהג בוכרה. It's a Bukharian minhag. And this way, all the Jewish people continue to behave in their own way, in their own fashion. The Rabbanit is not in this call today because she's chaperoning Elchanan's field trip out to the mountains of Julian in San Diego County. But yesterday she played for me a clip, which she had to translate for me in Yiddish. It was taught in Yiddish. And in this class, the rabbi said the following. Obviously, I'm not in agreement. Okay, so nobody should think that. He says, the Shulchan Aruch was written, I promise you this is what he said. Shulchan Aruch was written for converts to Judaism. He said, because all of us have mothers and fathers to ask what chumrot we should do on Passover, which stringencies we have on Pesach. The only people who need to rely on a book like the Shulchan Aruch are the people who have no tradition. For me, this is a fantastical understanding of the way the Jewish law works. But for him, he's very clear. I come from a home in this country. And in this home, like one man told me, I don't eat avocados on Pesach. Why I don't eat avocados on Pesach? Because my grandfather did not eat avocados on Pesach. And I can tell you why your grandfather did not eat avocados on Pesach. Likely, he came from a country, like some of our grandparents, that didn't have avocados. So what do you mean he didn't eat avocados on Pesach? He just didn't have such a food in his life, or he maybe would have eaten it. But because he didn't do it, I'm not going to do it either. We've created a world that is obsessed with minhagim, this minhag, like that. Not even a real legal definition of a minhag. There is a legal definition of a minhag, and it is not whatever my grandparents did. Even now, with the generation that has come to Eretz Israel, or read here in the United States, we all came together. Everyone continues to behave in the way that they behaved before. And if someone comes to one of the leaders of the community, or to some committee in the community, some organization of the community, you need some help from the community, you want to join a synagogue in the community, what's the first question they ask? They ask you, where are you from? Which ethnicity are you from? Which nation are you from? Which nation or language or ethnicity do you come from? I walk into Beit Knesset. So what are you? What am I? I'm Jewish. Ivri Anochi. I'm a Hebrew. And I serve Adonai Elohei HaShamayim. That's who I say. What am I? What kind of answer is that? My grandfather used to say, I'm Jewish. And they would laugh at him. No, yeah, but what kind of Jewish? There's no kind of Jewish. There's Jewish and not Jewish. Jewish. We're Jewish. I'm a Yehudi. But first they ask you, what kind of Yehudi? It's like when people here ask you, where are you from? You say, oh, I'm from San Diego. No, where are you from? From always means, where are you from before that? Everybody wants to know, where are you from? And all of this has happened to us because of our numerous sins. The temple was destroyed because of hatred, baseless hatred that existed between us. We were exiled into these particular countries, not as a bragging right, but it's a bragging right that my grandparents come from Sepharad, which is a country of Catholic idol worshippers. That's my bragging right. I'm so special. I come from Germany, this culture of civilization who made a mass genocide against Am Yisrael. That's something to be proud of. I come from Yemen, and Yemen is still today, the literacy level is I don't want to tell you percentages, so as not to offend the numbers. That's what we're proud of. We're proud of our galuyot. V'nikra shemam aleinu, so much so that we now have adopted their names. I'm a Yemenite Jew. I'm a Moroccan Jew. I'm a German Jew. I'm a Lithuanian Jew. I'm a Polish Jew. When we were living in those countries, what were we? We were just Jews. They didn't call us Lithuanian Jews in Lithuania, or they would have let us stay there. They didn't call my family Moroccan Jews when we were in Morocco, or they wouldn't have thrown us out of Morocco. The same thing with Yemen. And these names have been stuck on our shoulders as a burden until today. Says Rabbi Avraham Chacham, we are living in a reality where the names of the Baalim, the names of these idols, are stuck on us. Says the Kadosh Baruch Hu, one day there will come a time. One of the steps to redemption will be that I will remove these names from you. No longer will you be called by these titles that are not yours. And with that in mind, I wish to enter back into the writings of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. Let's look together at the bottom of page 30 in the Roman numerals. Just confirming everyone knows where I'm at now. I'm back in the Keter Shem Tov on page 30 in the Roman numerals. It should be, I think it's 28 in the PDF numbers. Says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs up from the bottom. Shema na kore na'im. Listen, my dear reader. B'ma shenish'alti al zeh shanim. What I've been asked many years already. Im rashai ish mimishpachat Ashkenazim שרצונו לעשות כולה בדין שפסק מרן הבית יוסף ועשה כסברתו. Can an Ashkenazi person who wishes to act permissively based on the Shulchan Aruch, can he behave that way? אבל הרמה מחמיר, but the Rama, Rabbi Moshe Isserlish, he's stringent. Can I, an Ashkenazi, follow Sephardic halakha? Ma yedino? What is the halachic status? Can I make such a choice? Teshuvati hayta לעיין בספר פנים מאירות. I told him, says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, go look in the book Panim Meirot. Shekatav, that he wrote, and I realize now I forgot to post a link to the biography of Panim Meirot in your group. Shekatav de kol hecha de maran umoram chalukin. That any place where the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Yosef Karo, and the Rama disagree, v'hora echad le'akel gedat maran, and somebody rules to be lenient like the Shulchan Aruch, I'm just translating, be'atra denahu kemoram, tzarich hu teshuva v'kapara. If it is a place that has a custom to follow Ashkenazi law, then somebody who behaves in accordance with the Shulchan Aruch must repent and ask for atonement from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Who's answering this question? Who is Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine? He's a Sephardic rabbi, living at this point, I don't know if he's in London or Ramsgate or Manchester, but living in the United Kingdom. And he's answering this question. If you are an Ashkenazi who want to follow the Shulchan Aruch in a place where the custom is to follow the Rama, then you need to do Teshuvah. And he gives you 2 citations here. One to the Panim Meirot, but 2, look at source 16, to Hagaon Azulai B'Shem HaGedonim. Are you familiar with the book Shem HaGedonim of Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai? Anyone familiar with this book? Okay. The Chida Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulay, wrote an encyclopedia, and I heard a legend. I don't know if it's true. I never spent time to verify it. Kehillat used to travel many places to collect money for yeshivot and to write books and publish books. And what he did was, especially when he traveled through Europe, was he would sit in very wealthy people's libraries and write down notes and read books and study them and make short versions of them and write down authors' biographical information. They heard a legend that he was once in prison and he didn't have what to study, so he wrote this book. Now, I don't know if that's true. I'm just telling you a legend. I'm telling you that the Kehillat was like an encyclopedia. It was a very special Talmid Chacham. And he made an encyclopedia called Shem HaGedolim, the name of the giants. And the first half is Ma'arechet Sofrim. The first half of it is names of rabbis. So you look up, let's say, I don't know, choose a name. Moshe ben Maimon. Rabbi Moshe ben Maimon. So you look up Maimon, you would look it up, you would find a short blurb, whatever the Kehillat wanted to tell you about him, maybe some books that he wrote, and then hala, to the next rabbi. The second half of the book is Ma'arechet Sefarim. So it's all about the different Sefarim. So if you wanted to look up a book like Panim Mirot, for example, you look to the letter Pei, and then you would find Panim Mirot. This book was written by, and he will tell you everything you want to know about that Chacham. And this book is therefore useful in two different directions. It's an encyclopedia of sorts, biographical encyclopedia. I have a few different versions of this book. They have different footnotes. The Kehillat obviously was limited in his access to certain documents, or maybe his memory sometimes didn't always serve him correctly, or the sources that he looked at were secondary sources, not primary sources. So sometimes it helps to adjust some of the dates or to fix the biographies of some of the Chachamim or whatever else might happen. And therefore, I have a number of editions. In this one, I'm reading to you from letter Tet. Under the entry of Tur Bet Yosef, he talks about the Shulchan Aruch. He talks about how the Arizal claims that Maran had a neshama from here and the Rama had a neshama from there. I'm not dealing with Kabbalah today. It's out of my jurisdiction. But he says the following. And for those of you who've studied with me about Maran in the past, you've heard the first half of this, but probably not the second half. Ukvar yadua, and it's known, says the Kehillat. The be'eretz hatzvi, that in the land of Israel, uve'eretz Mitzrayim, ve'arabistan, Damascus, V'aram Soba, V'arei Paras, Uglilot Turkey, V'arei HaMa'arav. He is mentioning to you Israel, Egypt, Damascus, Syria, Iran, Turkey, the countries of the Ma'arav. He means the West, perhaps North Africa. Kiblu alehem horaot Maranza. They've accepted upon themselves the rulings of the Shulchan Aruch, Maran. Zulati b'dinei mamonot. That's with the exception of financial law. Because in Turkey there was, listen, we're dealing with changing a whole Bedin's legal system. And in Turkey there were some exceptions to what they accepted from Shulchan Aruch. I've talked about that elsewhere also. And he writes, in the land of Israel, and even in Israel, where some people followed a practice to be stringent in some areas like the Rama, but they never protested those who were lenient like the Shulchan Aruch. And from these things that Tishma you should understand, the be'ir shenahagu kemaran, that in a place where the halacha follows Shulchan Aruch, im echad tofes kekulat moram go'arin bo, v'lo yafe asa lifrotz geder. That if there's in a place where the Shulchan Aruch is the law, that's what's accepted practice, then somebody who follows the Rama, we protest him. It's not nice what he's doing. Umaharam, in the Maharam, his name is Rabbi Meir ben Yitzchak Eisenstadt. He was born in 1670 and died in 1744. I want to tell you that he lived in Poland. Don't hold me to it. He was the Shach, so the Shach, the Siftei Kohen, the Shulchan Aruch, his sister's son, so the nephew of the Shach, the grandson of the sister of the Shach. He raised an interesting personality in his house, Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz. Have you heard of Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz? My wife is from the family of Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz. You can leave the conversations about Shabtai Tzvi for another time. But Rabbi Yonatan Eibshitz was orphaned from his parents at a young age, and Rabbi Meir ben Yitzchak Eisenstadt took him into his house and raised him. Some of his more famous descendants, you may know some of them, the Pitrei Tshuva, You may know of the Nitziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, who was the Rosh Yeshiva in Volozhin. His brother was Rabbi Meir Bar Ilan, if I'm not mistaken. And another famous Chacham that you might recognize his name, Rabbi Isra Zalman Meltzer, who was a rabbi in Eretz Yisrael around the time of Rav Kook, when he was in Eretz Yisrael also. Panim Meirot writes the following. The Ashkenazi shehora kekulat Maran, that an Ashkenazi who rules like the Shulchan Aruch, tzarich teshuvah v'kapara. He needs teshuvah and kapara. He needs to repent and atone. V'chen hu batre dema Maran mi she'ora kulat moram tzarich teshuvah v'kapara. And therefore he says, the opposite is also true. And so what do we have in reality? What is Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine trying to show you? We have a reality where some poskim say, what kind of Jew are you? Well, if you're the wrong kind of Jew, doing the wrong kind of Judaism, you need to do teshuvah. And I'm not sure if Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine meant this answer in jest, because you're going to see in just a few sentences he didn't like it. But he told it to this person, meaning, what do you want from me? Panim Meirot already said that if you're Ashkenazi and you're in a place where people follow Ashkenazi law, then by following Sephardic halakha, you need to do teshuvah. Now, those of you who know how I think about halakha, there really is no Ashkenazi and Sephardi halakha, but I'm reading a book, and I must tell you what's written inside of the book. If we continue, Chazar HaShoel, the questioner came back and asked me a second time. V'sha'alani, I'm back in the writings of Rabbi Gaguine. Uma odot be'ir shenimtza ba shte kehilot. What about a city which has two communities inside of it? Kehilot Sephardim ve'Ashkenazim. There are both Sephardim and Ashkenazim, so it's a mixed community. Most of our communities today are not just Ashkenazi or Sephardic communities. V'chol kehila noheget keminhaga bekulot v'chumrot. And all of the communities follow their own traditions, whether to be strict or to be lenient. Is this something that you can agree exists in the world? You know such a thing? You live in a city where some communities do one thing and other communities do another thing? Of course, I think most of us live like that. So what's the question? איך יעשו אם הוזמנו יחד השתי קהילות בחופה או לסעודת מצווה אחרת? What should they do if they're invited to the same wedding or to another mitzvah ceremony? Could be a brit milah, could be a bar mitzvah, could be sheva berachot, could be a chnasat zevatot, whatever it be. We're invited. Unfortunately, the communities have to meet at some point, and they have to meet. And what do they do now? אם הספרדי הוא בעל השמחה וקונה הבשר מהמקולין הספרדי, if the Sephardi is the host of the simcha, and he bought his meat from the Sephardic kosher store, איך יעשה האשכנזי המזומן שם? What should the Ashkenazi do if the Sephardic butcher is the one who provided the meat? או להפך, אם האשכנזי הוא בעל השמחה. Or what do you do if the Ashkenazi is the person who's hosting? What does the Sephardi do about the food that is there? This is a scenario that happens? Of course, it happens all the time. וגם על זה השבתי לו. About this I also told him to look. שיעיין שם בפנים מהירות. You should see what the פנים מהירות wrote. שכתב צריך בעל הסעודה להודיע להם. That the host has to let them know that the food is maybe not kosher for them. He said, look also in the writings of the Maharashdam, in his Teshuvot, top of page 31, שנשאל כן בעניין הספרדים והאשכנזים שבעיר סלוניקי, איכה בזה משום לא תתגודדו. The Jews there wanted to know if there was a problem of לא תתגודדו. Someone help me out. What does the Torah say? לא תתגודדו. What does the Torah mean when it says לא תתגודדו? What is it about? What's the מקור? בתורה, מה התכוון הקדוש ברוך הוא?
The practice is that if somebody passed away, died, the nation of the world used to cut themselves. The Iranians keep doing it till these days.
Okay, so the original meaning of the pasuk is, especially it seems particularly to the Kohanim, but the initial intent of the pasuk is that when someone passes away, we should not physically harm ourselves the way the nations of the world do it. Okay, along come Chachamim and they understand this to mean something completely different. Maza balot asu? Ama?
different groups.
Okay. Along come Chachamim, thank you, Ima. They say, Lo ta'asu agudot. You should not make yourselves into separate groups, meaning there's only one Jewish people, and therefore the Jewish people should not separate themselves into different categories. And from here, the Chachamim in the Talmud have different questions. What if there's one city with two Batei Din, or there's one city with only one Bedin but two communities, and all kinds of conversations that come out of this. Nonetheless, you find that later in history, the Jews are concerned. If I'm in a city, and there are Sephardim and Ashkenazim, do we violate the prohibition of Lo Titgodedu? We cannot behave differently. People should not come to think that there are two Torot. They should not come to think there are two Jewish peoples. They should not come to think that they're in the Jewish community that could create confusion. And I'm not even going to touch that question today with the 10-foot pole, but the fact that it exists bothers Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine greatly. Someone have a copy of my book handy? Marlene, you're here? No, I think I have one on the shelf. You do? Okay, you have a copy of the book? Maybe you'll find it before me. I have a story in here. I quoted about, yeah, I don't remember what page. Something about relying on Sephardim or Ashkenazim on each other. Oh, here. Sorry, I found it already. Look on page 165 in my book, Shalom. I quote the following story. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Auerbach told the following story. After I got married, or someone wrote this about Rav Auerbach. After I got married, I came to Rav Auerbach and I asked him, in my parents' home and my in-laws' home, they eat foods with various Israeli rabbinical supervisions which I do not eat in my own home. How should I conduct myself when I eat with them? That's a common question. It comes up a lot. Rav Auerbach responded, 2 witnesses attended a Brit Milah of a Sephardic family, and Harav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, who was present. Who was Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld? Anyone know anything about him? I'm going to make these uncomfortable pauses so someone unmutes themselves. Yes, who? Say? A rabbi in Yerushalayim, very good. It was a rabbi of Yerushalayim. They called him the rabbi of the old Yeshuv, as opposed to the new Zionist community. Later in life, though he was friends with Rav Kook earlier in his life, it seems that later in life there were people that pitted them against each other. The verdict is still out as to what exactly happened there. Nonetheless, he was one of the Kanaim. He was from the Zealots of Yerushalayim. My wife's grandmother. Yeah. So my father-in-law's mother was an orphan. And she was raised in the home of Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, from what I understand. Rabbi Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, he was present. And he ate the meat that had undergone Sephardic Shechita. What's the problem with eating meat from Sephardic Shechita? Of course, it's not kosher. It's Sephardic. I'm asking you why it's not kosher.
They use the hind part.
Likely, very good, Marlene. Likely because they're using the backside of the animal. Likely, that's the problem. And Rav Yosef Chaim Sonnenfeld, he came and he ate. He said, when you are the guest of family members or other God-fearing people, you must eat everything they serve you. It's not a matter of anyone serving you non-kosher food. According to the essence of the law, all rabbinical supervisions are valid. Some supervisions are more strict on certain matters that do not touch on the essence of the law. I somewhat audaciously asked Rav Auerbach, but does Rav Auerbach conduct himself that way? And he responded, certainly. When I am at a wedding, I eat chicken prepared with rabbinical supervisions that I would not rely on in my own home. But that's not what Rav Shemtob Gaguine told him, because likely this story happened after Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine. In any case, the answer there was, I don't know, the Ashkenazim should tell the Sephardim not to eat their food, and the Sephardim should tell the Ashkenazim not to eat their food. That's what it says in the book. Chazal v'sha'al, he came back and asked, Uma odot im nitchatnu achat mishtei akilot zo bezo? What if, in a crazy situation, a Sephardic person marries an Ashkenazi person, or an Ashkenazi person marries a Sephardic person, a man or a woman a man? Mi nigrar achar mi? Who has to follow who? By the way, this question is maybe not so politically correct in the year 2024. And so before I read to Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine's answer, you should know, I'm not going to embarrass anybody. I'm going to tell you names. If you know who, you know who. In my Kehillat, I have two fine individuals who are responsible for really starting this Kehillat together with me. And I'm forever grateful to them for that. He comes from an Ashkenazi lineage, and she comes from a Yemenite lineage. And when he met her, I don't know if he knew much about Judaism, but she knew everything. And Baruch Hashem, after many years, not after many years, meaning it's now many years later, but then when they got married, they decided everything in their house would follow the Yemenite side of the family. And over the many years that
Not everything.
Not everything. Oh, why? Some.
Said she knew everything.
Oh, not everything. Okay, she's still learning. Rachel just outed herself. So, as the years went on, and I remember because we used to pray in a different Beit HaKnesset together, people would ask the kids, or they would even ask Baruch, but you're Ashkenazi, how could you do A, B, or C? That's not your minhag. And Baruch would always say, in my minhag, they ate chametz on Pesach, or my minhag was they didn't keep kosher, or something like that. And here you find that, of course, there are some people who follow one side or the other. Sometimes that's the most natural process in which things work. Sometimes it's a lot different than that. I'll tell you about my personal family in just a moment. But his answer was as follows. Hishafti lo, I told him, Tzarich hada layen besever admat kodesh. You should look in the book Admat Kodesh, shepasak, he wrote, sheisha nigreret achar ha'ish lehakel o lehachmir, that a man is the one who determines what happens in the home, and therefore the wife is the one who follows the husband, whether to be lenient or to be strict. Don't get upset at me, I'm just reading from inside of the book. The logic, if I remember, it's been a very long time since I saw that book. The logic, if I remember correctly, was that just like a person, let's say a Sephardi comes to an Ashkenazi city, original practice would be that while in that city, they follow whatever is the practice in that place, and vice versa. Sephardim, Ashkenazim who come to a Sephardic place, and that's why you find the last name Mizrahi or the last name Ashkenazi usually reflects the opposite of who they are, because that's where they came from. The idea was that this is the man's home. He brought a woman into his home. That's his city, and she came to his city, and what she does here is one thing. That's why there's so much literature. So what happens when she goes to her father's home? Can she still eat kitniot in her father's home, if not in her husband's home? We're in a little bit of an outdated situation, because I'm not sure that most of us live in homes like that. Maybe there are still people like that, but at least not in the circles that we're right now sitting with and studying with. I don't know that, I'm sure the patriarchy lives, but in this particular situation, I'm not sure that every home is as rigid as that. I can tell you that when I got married, I made a mistake. So, here are confessions of when I got married. So Baruch Hashem, my wife and I knew each other for a long time before I got married. It wasn't something new. It's not like she popped out of Borough Park straight into San Diego. There was a process. Took us a while. But even though she had met Hara Peretz and we had an opportunity to learn together, my wife had come ready to many of my shiurim even before we were married. The first or second Shabbat after we got married, so for sure the second, because it was after Shabbat Berachot, I came home from the Beit HaKnesset, and I saw my wife by the Shabbat candles crying her eyes out. You know, I'm a young Chatan, so I'm going through my checklist of things I did wrong. Like, I bought flowers, check. She doesn't even like my bag. Okay. I put the laundry in the laundry basket. Check. Great. Whatever things they told me are gonna ruin my relationship. So I said, I don't know what I did. I said Shabbat Shalom before I left. All the boxes were checked. I come and I say, what's wrong? And she told me the following sentence, and I think she has a video where she shares a story. Hopefully our narratives match. She said, Yonatan, I love you, but I love my God more than I love you. And ever since I married you, it feels like I've given up my God for something that I completely don't understand. And she was right. Everything that she was not allowed to do before in Shabbat, she's allowed to do. Everything she wasn't allowed to eat, everything. It seemed like completely different religion. And I told my wife, listen, stop. We made a mistake. Route recalculation. When you get lost in your GPS, route recalculation. you're not going to change anything from the way you do it in your parents' house. Not your siddur, not the accent you pray with, not the way you light Shabbat candles, not when you say the bracha and wash it. Nothing. Don't change anything. Let's take the next we have forever together. Let's take the next forever and sit down and learn Torah together. Every single thing that we need to know, what do we do in our home? We have Baruch Hashem, we have the time, we have the ability. Let's take books and let's learn together. This many years later, Baruch Hashem, and we're still learning together. And everything that has happened in our home has been a decision that we've made together. Now, I'm not going to lie to you. We ultimately follow Shulchan Aruch in my home. But not because it's my home, then this is the way you do it, because you married me, because it's not the way relationships work. In general, it's not a healthy dynamic to have in a relationship. Someone called me a while ago. I'm marrying somebody, my husband demands A, B, C, D. I said, listen, if I were you, I would run for the mountains. It's not a healthy situation to be in. You don't want to marry somebody who's dictating to you how you're going to live your life. So in my home, even though the decisions usually fall out on the side of this is the way that we did things by our parents, but it's because we learned together. It's a decision we made together. It's no longer me telling anyone else what to do. So maybe somebody can learn something from that story. Nonetheless, practically, we need to know, can we eat each other's food? I'm going to go visit my in-laws. Can I eat their food? Or even better, I was once on an airplane. And on the airplane, they sat me next to a Hasidic Rebbe. Another story, a real Rebbe, not a rabbi, a Rebbe. And he really was very kind to me the whole flight. But, it wasn't the best seat to watch movies. So we had conversations the whole flight. And one of the conversations that came up, he was adamant, it was right before Pesach, he was adamant, or right after Pesach. It was either going to Israel or coming from Israel. He was adamant that no matter what, if a Sephardic person made potatoes in his pots and pans, that an Ashkenazi would not allow to eat those potatoes on Pesach. Why? Because maybe the pot had kidniyot in it. And the kidniyot are so non-kasher for Ashkenazim that it's really forbidden to eat anything from those pots and pans at all. And here Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine says, but look here, you want to see another halakha. Ve'en le'esor hakelim shelahem. You cannot say that someone else's pots and pans are not kasher. כמו שאין לאסור כלים של בני ריינוס. כמו שכתב הרמה והשח העריך בדינים אלו, ומשם תלמוד לנידון דידן. Anyone know the story about the Bnei Rainus? You're familiar with this part of Shulchan Aruch? If you open up with me, it's Yoreh De'ah. I don't know if I put a link to that. Yoreh De'ah, chapter 64. So if you go to Sefaria, you click Halakha. And you put chapter 64, Halakha Tet. In this area, Maran is talking about forbidden fats. There are fats inside of the animal that we're not allowed to consume. What do we call them in Hebrew? Who said it? Chalev. Very good. So many an unscrupulous person has made a mistake reading chalav. Chalav is milk. Chalev is fat. Here he says, Chalev hadavuk lakeres halachad 9. Shetachat prisa asur. There's a certain fat that's stuck in the animal in a certain location, and it's forbidden, says Maran. Along comes the Raman. He says, "V'chen haminhag b'chol makom." Now, what the Shulchan Aruch says, it's the Ashkenazi custom everywhere. Milvad b'nei Rainus, except for the people of Rainus. Shenohagim b'miktzato heter, that they have a chacham who ruled for them leniently. Ve'en mochim bi'adam shekvar hora lehem zaken, and we don't protest their behavior because an elder, meaning a chacham, already ruled for them that it's mutar. Uvechol makom shenohagim bo isur, dino keshar chelev levatlo b'shishim. And any place like us, which we hold that fat is prohibited, it's nullified in 60 if it mixes into our food. But en oserin kelim shel bnei rainus ho'il v'nohagin bo heter. But we do not prohibit the utensils, the pots and pans of the people of Rainus. Why? Because they legitimately rule that it is mutar. So you can tell me that something is so not kasher that if it falls into our food, it would make it a problematic mixture of meat and milk, of kasher and non-kasher, meaning we would have to nullify it in 60. But it's also not a problem to use their pots and pans because technically for them it's kasher. Now, what do you find here? Some kind of middle ground of is it kasher or it's not kasher? Depends who you are. But even if we're not from them, we still will never treat the utensils to be not kasher. So this was what Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine is answering. Even though we may not eat the shechita of each other, but we don't believe that the other one's pots and pans become not kasher. This is important. There's a teshuvah. The Rama writes something similar. If you want to see, I'm not going to show you now, I don't have the time. If you want to look in Yoreh De'ah, Kuf, Tet, Vav. That's chapter 115. In Halakha Aleph, look what the Rama writes there about butter. And there was an Ashkenazi Chacham here in America, Rabbi Kamenetsky. Yaakov Kamenetsky wrote a book called Emet Yaakov. In his notes on Shulchan Aruch Yoreh De'ah, he used that same logic to say that those people who keep Chalav Yisrael, that was his example that he used, are able to use dairy utensils of people who don't keep Chalav Yisrael. Because even though they would not eat that dairy, but the milk cannot possibly make the utensils not kasher because they rule like a legitimate chacham who says that it is permissible. Listen, we're a very far place from this type of reality. Today in the Jewish community, I've already heard things like, if you go to somebody's house, they don't keep Chalav Yisrael, you should use their meat oven to cook your dairy instead of their dairy oven. Because the meat oven is only a mixture of meat and milk. But the dairy oven is a mixture of non-kasher with kasher. I don't know which reality I live in, but that's the reality that other people live in. So now that you know that, why are we reading all these depressing stories? What is the purpose? I want to read you one more source. But let me first read you what Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine writes. Kol ze hiveti lefanecha. I have only brought all of this to your attention. Leman teda, so you should know. Ad kama min haperud nimtza ben elu hashte hedot. You should understand just how deep the divide between these two communities are. V'chama min habilbul v'hamevucha hevia ben shnei shiftei Yisrael et shezeh oser ze matir. And look at the confusion, the chaos that has been created in the tribes of Israel. That which one person holds is forbidden, the other one says it's permissible. And that which says permissible, the other one says forbidden. וכל פסקן בוחר לו בדעת הפוסק הקרובה לדעתו. And every posek decides, I'm going to rule like the person who's most like my opinion. עד שהתורה חוגרת שק, until the Torah wears sackcloth, ואומרת, and she mourns and says, עשתוני כ1,000 תורות. They made me into 1,000 תורות. ורגשי האמונה נחלשו, בפרט בעיני קטני האמונה. And the feelings of emunah, faith and Jewish tradition that used to exist have decreased, especially by those who already were struggling with their faith. When Jewish people see, Sephardim do this, Ashkenazim do that, those Jews do this, and this community do that, halakha is chaos. What it creates is a feeling of can't be that that's the truth. It's a revulsion that people have that causes them to feel distant from Judaism. Barili, it's clear to me, kizot hayta da'agat gaon Yisrael, Maran HaBet Yosef, שהעמיס על עצמו עבודה כבירה בחיבור ספריו אלה. And it's clear to me, says Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, that this was the whole purpose of Rabbi Yosef Karo, Maran, when he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. ומגמה אחת הייתה לו. And he had only one intention, and I know that I get hated in many places for my willingness to stick to the Shulchan Aruch right or left. I'm not going to apologize for that. But it's because of this reason. לאחד את האומה הישראלית. He didn't want to restate the law. He didn't want to tell you what to do. He wanted to unite the Israelite nation. לחטיבה אחת, to one unit. and to one legal code, like the Torah says, the citizen, the traveler, everyone in the land should follow the same law. Why? For the purpose of unity. How long are we going to live? I don't need your house, you live in my house, I can't marry your kid, you live in my kid, I don't want to go to your school, I don't want to go to your shul, I don't go to your bit knesset, I don't go to your... How long can we live like that? בחיבור הבית יוסף עלה בידו, in the writing of the בית יוסף, מרן was able לתת ליהדות תמונה שלמה ומיוחדת, to give the Jewish people a wholesome picture, not a one-sided picture, but a picture including many, many different opinions. והיה יסוד ואבן פינה להוראה, ומקור נפתח אל בירורי טעמי ההלכה. And he showed you where everything came from in halakha, the reasons why we reached the conclusions we reached, and to make a foundation stone for halakha. ובזה קנה לו שם עולם בעולם ההוראה בישראל, אשר לא עלה ביד איש זולתו מיום מתן תורה על ידי המחוקק משה רבנו עליו השלום. From the day that Moshe Rabbeinu gave us the Torah, this is Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine is telling you, until the days of Maran, Rabbi Yosef Karo, there was no other posek in history who enjoyed the widespread fame and acceptance like the Shulchan Aruch. And I know that that's going to provoke in some people a reaction. Even the Ashkenazim study Shulchan Aruch. Every place in the world studied the Shulchan Aruch. Took some time, sure. Were there opponents? Absolutely. I've given shulim about that in the past. At the end of the day, any Jewish group that you'll go to, kimat, even the ones that you think were anti-Shulchan Aruch, study the Shulchan Aruch. Nobody else enjoyed such popularity. Maran did because he took everyone into consideration. I have a shul about that. I taught in the Chabura once. There's a 3-part series on Maran Rabbi Yosef Karo. And yes, of course, when you try to make everyone happy, you sure make other people unhappy. I'm not telling you it's a perfect book, but it's a book that attempted to unite the Jewish people into one nation. And then he says something here very difficult. I would never say this, but Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine levels an accusation on Rabbi Moshe Sirlish. And I've always said the opposite, that Rabbi Moshe Sirlish came to unite. Instead of Ashkenazim having their own book and rejecting the Shulchan Aruch, I believe that the Ramah came to unite the Sephardim and Ashkenazim around one book, even if it meant writing a commentary that sometimes disagreed with the Shulchan Aruch. At least all the Jews are holding the same book in their hand. But he sees it differently. Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine writes the following: אבל כאשר בא הרמה ופרס מפתו על שולחן הזהב, when he came and he spread his tablecloth on the golden table of Maran, הבניין הענקי שבנה הבית יוסף נזדעזע. The tremendous building, the accomplishment that Maran built, began to shake at its foundations. ומה היו התוצאות? And what was the result of the Ramah contradicting the Shulchan Aruch? שחזרה תורת ההלכה ונהייתה ל1,000 תורות. That instead of being 2 Torot, the Torah went back to being 1,000 Torot. ומי יודע אם קרע כזה יש תקווה כי יבוא יום ויתאחד העולם. And who knows, if this kind of tear, fragmentation of the Jewish people, who knows if it's even possible to unite us in the state that we're in right now. I don't want to focus on the accusation against the Ramah. I want to focus on, there were many attempts in history to unite the Jewish people. In Yemen, there was a big war around the Shulchan Aruch. And I mentioned to you there was a Chacham there. He wrote a book called Shtilei Zetim. Rabbi David, he's the author of Shtilei Zetim. And he was very adamant that he's going to follow Shulchan Aruch, and he writes nothing about what the Ramah says. Why? His attitude was, if I, a Yemenite who follows the Rambam, am going to give up my traditions to unite with the Jewish people and follow Shulchan Aruch, you, the Ashkenazim, also have to give up your traditions to unite and follow. I'm not going to give up everything I have to become one, and you're not going to give up what you need. If we want to become one, let's do it already. But we're not going to keep playing games. My minhag, your minhag. We're ending it now. The buck stops here. Unfortunately, the Ramah taught us we could argue with Shulchan Aruch. I don't believe that's what the Ramah intended. But what ended up happening was that moment of inspiration where the world rallied around Shulchan Aruch seems to have disappeared. ומי לידינו יתקע כאשר ישוב אדוני ורחמנו להשיב לנו את ארצנו ארץ ישראל. And who will make sure that when we come back, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will soon give us Eretz Yisrael? By the way, he's writing this in Nisan of Tafshin Chet, 1940. 1948. This is
right before your life.
This is 1 month and 5 days before the declaration of Israeli independence. He writes this on Rosh Chodesh Nisan. He says, soon, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us back Eretz Yisrael. How can we become one nation again in the land of Israel? Whether as it relates to our prayer services. How are we going to become one with all of our customs and our practices and our laws? There's so much division between us. How are we going to become one? The answer to that question, I want to leave to you for next week. But for right now, if you'll give me just a few more moments, I want to read with you one last source for today. I don't know that I've ever read this source in public in front of a camera. Definitely in my Kehillat for sure, but the people in my Kehillat, they hear all kinds of things I don't say out loud. Let's pull up a newspaper. I added a PDF to your Zoom invitation. It's called HaCherut. Do you see that? It should come up like this. I printed out a copy of the newspaper. I pulled this out of the National Library of Israel archives. This newspaper, HaCherut, has a sad history to it. Give me a few minutes. I don't want to rush. If anyone needs to go, you can hear the rest in the recording, but I'm going to try to finish the shiur with this. HaCherut was an Israeli, pre the state of Israel, Jewish newspaper, periodical, I don't know how you call it, and at a certain point in its history actually came out every single day. It was founded in 1909 and pretty much collapsed by 1917. There was a short attempt later in history, I think around the 30s, to revive it, in 1933, but it died out and it wasn't really successful. This newspaper was famous for officially being the newspaper of the Sephardic community, but as one historian points out, it was marginalized because of its Sephardic origins and because of its nationalistic origins and because of its religious origins. And because of those three things, there was a tremendous pressure in the secular Zionist community to push away this publication from the limelight, but practically, it was the most pluralistic publication that existed in that time period in the land of Israel. It included Sephardic authors and Ashkenazi authors and people all across the religious spectrum. There's certain issues that it did get involved in politically that it really took a hard line on. But for the rest of it, it happened to be one of the more open-minded newspapers that existed in the Jewish community at the time. And it's a tremendous place to get information just what was going on in Israel in the years 1909 to 1917. One of these newspapers that came out on the 2nd of January, 1913. This publication came out. There was a time that Eliezer ben Yehuda was involved here. The reason Eliezer ben Yehuda was involved in this publication, has anyone heard of the war of languages that happened in Israel? Familiar with this period of history? Maybe one of my Israelis remember their social studies class. Before the founding of the State of Israel, there was a German organization, a non-Zionist German organization called Ezra. And Ezra was funding what later would become the Technion, but it was, they called it the Technikum, that's what they called it. There was the original name of that school. And there was, out of the 26 schools that were in Israel, only a handful of them were teaching Hebrew as the primary language to be spoken in the school. And there was a big push among the early Zionist leaders to speak Hebrew, and abandon other languages. This German group felt very strongly that if they were funding a university in Israel, that they were going to make sure that the language spoken there would be German. And it wasn't purely out of hatred for Hebrew. There were definitely those people who believed that, and a polemic said, oh, they hate Hebrew. As much as Hebrew at the time was still developing itself into a modern language, and as a school that wanted to study technology, the German Jews were correct that there were certain words that still didn't exist in modern Hebrew. And therefore, it would be more practical to use a language that already had a scientific background to it. Nonetheless, this became a big war. And the Cherut newspaper took a hard line. They took the side, everything in Israel must happen in Hebrew. And this became a major part of that conversation, and that's why Eliezer ben Yehuda got involved. But I don't want to bore you with history lessons. One day, B'ezrat Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give us time to have history classes together. For right now, please look at the last page. the last page of this newspaper, page 4. You see that page? You see some very interesting things. You see someone advertising a new hotel that opened up in Mea Shearim. You see that bottle in front of you? That bottle is a new type of shampoo that just came to Israel at the time, and they say that it makes your hair feel unbelievable, that shampoo. Different things that were going on in regular life that was happening. On the right side of this page, in tiny, tiny letters, but you likely have it on a screen. And what I'm going to do, I'm going to open it in my iPad so that I can zoom into these letters instead of reading it from a piece of paper. Give me just a moment. Okay. So do you see where I am? I'm going to end the shiur with this column here. There was a chacham. His name was Rabbi Chaim Yisachar Abulafia. Alav Shalom. Rabbi Chaim Yisachar Abulafia, he was the chief rabbi of Tveria. There were a few Rabbi Chaim Abulafias who were rabbis of Tveria. The first one was in the time of the Or HaChaim HaKadosh. The second one, this is a later one from 1884. He was born in Tveria under the Ottoman Empire. And then he passed away in 1970 already under Israeli Israel. He was a special chacham, very unique chacham, because even when he lost his job as the chief rabbi, he continued to serve the community. And he continued to serve the community for free. And on his grave, they inscribed, Kan nach Adam, here lays a person, she'avad tzibur be'emuna, who served his community faithfully, be'ono ve'hono shelo al manat lekabel pras, with everything that he had, and not in order to receive a reward. He did it for free. We should have leaders like that again. Let me read to you what he writes here. מאי חומר מרו, וליבי דווי עליי בראותי את הפירוד השורר בין האשכנזים והספרדים. He's writing this to the public. My insides are crying over the separation that exists between Ashkenazim and Sephardim. עד שכמעט חושבים אותם כשני גזעים נפרדים. The people think they're two separate ethnicities, two separate nations. אין אני בא לדבר על המנהגים השונים, שונחו כחץ מבדיל ביניהם. I'm not coming to talk about the particular minhagim that are separating them. אלא רק על השאלה החשובה בדבר כשרות הבשר. What's particularly bothering me in this letter, says Rabbi Chaim Abulafia, is regarding the kashrut of the meat. הנוגעת כל כך ליהדות, which is so critical to Judaism. Why is it such a big deal? Why is meat such a big deal to Judaism? There's no wrong answer. I'm curious to hear your thoughts.
Because food is major component of Jewish life.
Okay, food is a major component of Jewish life. Meat, let's say that traditionally Jews had meat for any Sudat mitzvah, any Shabbat meal, any holiday meal, any Brit Milah, anything had meat inside of it. We always get together around the meat. More than that, from all the things we can eat from non-Jews, the one thing we can't is meat. Meat and maybe cheese and wine, perhaps some fish. It's critical that Jewish people have a source of meat they can agree on. קשה לסבול את החרפה והעלבון שגורמים האשכנזים להספרדים בעת שהם שוחטים את הבקר. I cannot explain to you, says Rabbi Chaim Abulafia, the shame, the humiliation that the Ashkenazim caused the Sephardim when they slaughtered the cows. ומוציאים אותו לא לפי דיניהם. And they find it not to be kasher according to their laws. And he writes it in parentheses, like, what does it mean, their laws? We don't have the same Torah. We're the same people. מיד מבדילים את הבשר ומוכרים אותו לא לאשכנזים חלילה, אלא לספרדים. They immediately put that meat aside, and who do they sell it to? חלילה they should sell it לאשכנזים. They sell it to the ספרדים. כאילו אלה הם מין גויים, חס ושלום. Like the Sephardim are the goyim that you could sell your non-kasher meat to. ועוד דבר, יותר נורא רואה אני פה בירושלים. So I see something even worse here in Yerushalayim. כי השכנים הספרדים והאשכנזים, that both the Sephardim and the Ashkenazim, who are neighbors with each other, אינם משילים את כליהם אחד להשני מחשש כשרות. They don't lend their utensils to each other because of kashrut concerns. By the way, what do you see from here? What does Shlomo HaMelech tell us? En kol chadash tachat hashemesh. There's nothing new under the sun. We think that these things happen today. Oh, my neighbor doesn't eat my food, they don't trust my kashrut. It's old problems. Old problems. גם האשכנזים לא שולחים מאכלים לבשלם בתנור אחד, שבו מתבשלים מאכלי הספרדים. You know, people didn't have ovens in their own homes. They had communal ovens. And so you would pay rent to go put your cholent pot inside of the communal oven. So the Ashkenazim were careful not to send their pots of food to be heated up in the ovens or to be cooked in the ovens where the Sephardim have their food. Is this not a national disgrace of our people? האם אין חילוקי דעות אלו גורמים להפריד את העם, להוסיף קרע על קרע? Says Rabbi Chaim Abulafia, isn't this not bad enough that we're a divided people, now we're coming to really separate the people? Even our food can't go in the same oven together? I think it says me'alati. I think so. It's a pasuk me'alati, but maybe me'elohai. I don't know if I could tell you. I can't make out the letter. כי אין בליבי שום טינה לחי האשכנזים שהם עצמי ובשרי. Says Rabbi Chaim Abulafia, I have no complaints about the Ashkenazim. They're my bones, they're my flesh. I have to tell you, I have maybe 12 or 15 sources where Sephardic Chachamim of this generation wrote this way about Ashkenazim. I don't have the same number in the other direction. I collect these sources. אבל ליבי כואב ומתפוצץ בראותי, but my heart explodes inside of me when I see שהאשכנזים החרדים, that the religious Ashkenazim, יסלחו לי על הדמיון הזה, they should forgive me for saying this example, מביטים על הספרדים, באותו היחס שמתייחסים אנחנו אל הקראים. There's a little irony here. That the Ashkenazim look at the Sephardim the way we look at the Karaim. Meaning, maybe you're biologically Jewish, but you're not Jewish enough for me to eat your food. ואולם, הנגע הזה לא חדש. הוא בא מתקופת מרן ומורם. This is not a new problem. This problem has existed since the days of Maran and the Rama. He goes here into a little bit of history, trying to tell us about the story of the Shulchan Aruch, and how it spread, and how the Rama had to write his notes. And he said it wasn't such, I'm going to skip some of the history, you know this history. And then he says in the next big paragraph, Ashkenazim והספרדים היו רחוקים. The Ashkenazim and Sephardim used to live apart. They live in different countries. ולכן לא הורגשו חילוקי הדעות שהיו ביניהם באופן בולט. And you couldn't really tell that there were major differences between ספרדים and Ashkenazim. אבל עכשיו בתקופתנו זו, but now in our generation, שחיים האשכנזים והספרדים במרכז אחד, when we live together, עיני כל היהודים בתפוצות גלותם נשואות ארץ ישראל, all the Jews in the world are watching the Jews of Israel. אבל אין מי שיחשוב על הפירוד הגדול השורר ביניהם כמו שביארתי לעיל, but nobody pays attention. Look how separated we are in our own homeland. צריך איפה לרפא את הנגע. We must heal this wound. ולהביא הסכמה בין שני הצדדים, and to bring agreement between both parties. למען לא יהיו עוד לשני גויים חלילה, so that we should not be considered further two nations. בתקופת רבנו הקדוש נפלגו שתי הישיבות של שמאי והלל בדעותיהן. In the days of Shammai and Hillel, they were so separate in the way they thought. החכמים אז לא מצאו דרך נכונה להסכמה הדדית. The rabbis of that generation could not bridge the Shammai Hillel gap because of the mentalities that were so different. אולם כעת, but now, שאין חילוקי דעות כאלו, that we are not so different, we don't fight with each other so much. I don't know if he's right, but that's what he says. צריך ונחוץ מאוד. It's so pertinent. שכל הרבנים, שבכל הארצות, that all the rabbis in all of the countries, יתאספו, should gather together, למען הסיר את נגע הפירוד, to get rid of this wound of separation that exists between us. ולחבר את שתי הקצוות, and to unite both extremes. היהדות לא תפרח מעולם. Judaism will never be able to blossom. כל זמן שנושאי דגלה, so long as those who carry her flag, מבלי הבדל עדה ומפלגה, regardless of background or political affiliation, לא יחוברו ויוחדו יחד. Unless they will unite and connect and become one. לדעתי, in my opinion, נחוצה עבודת האחדות של האשכנזים והספרדים קודם מעבודת התרבות או הפצת הלשון וכדומה. He says, you're busy in this newspaper all day trying to get us to adopt Hebrew language, Hebrew culture. He says, more important than all of that is to unite Ashkenazim and Sephardim into one nation. וכשכל היהודים מאוחדים, and when all the Jews are united, ספרדים ואשכנזים יחד, ספרדים ואשכנזים will be one, אז יהיה נקל מאוד להוציא לפועל את כל המטרות הקדושות שיש לעמנו. Then we'll be able to accomplish together all of the great things that we want to accomplish. כמו הפצת לשוננו היקרה בפי בני ישראל, like the revival of our language in the mouths of all of the Jewish people, which is so precious to us. עבודת התרבות והתחייה הלאומית וכדומה, the culture of Israel and the national revival of our people. אז הכוחות יהיו יותר מאוחדים ויותר פוריים. We'll be stronger together. We'll be able to help each other together. עמי, my nation, my nation. מתי תתאחד? When will you become united? I would read this on Tisha B'Av. כבר הגיעה השעה לאחדותנו. The time for our unity has come. נתעורר מכל קצות ארצות פיזורנו. Let us gather and wake ourselves from all the corners of our exile. ונברא לנו אומה שלמה ומאוחדת. לחטיבה אחת ובלתי נפרדת. Let us take our united nation and our divided nation and create one united nation. יקומו הגאונים והרבנים היותר מפורסמים. Let the rabbis that are the most famous of our people get together, ויתוועדו ועד חכמים, make some kind of committee of sages, למען יסירו את המכשולים העוצרים בעד אחדותנו הדתית והמסורתית. And they can together remove all the obstacles to our unity. And he says the following sentence. הלב פצוע יותר מדי. The heart is too hurt, it's too wounded. הגלות אכלה את נשמתנו. The exile has devoured our souls. אך לא כבתה את ניצוצותיה, but it did not extinguish the last embers of sparks there. נרחיב את הניצוצות האלה. Let us quickly, before they go out, let us quickly ignite these sparks. למען יהיה להבה גדולה. So it could become one great flame. The Shalhevetiyah. It should become the flame of God. Where does it say that pasuk Shalhevetiyah? Someone help me out. Shir HaShirim. Shalhevetiyah, the flame of God. To be honest, it was one of the names I considered before I chose the name Shiviti. I had a few problems. One, who's going to be able to say it? Two, even the people who could say it will say Ka, and then they're not going to say Hashem's name. Lastly, it's too long to spell, and there's no good way to write it in English, so we got the Shiviti instead. Shalhevetiyah shetachamem et libotenu hakarim. Let the flame of Hashem, of the unity of the Jewish people, warm our cold hearts. V'to'odedenu letchiyah leumit datit amitit. And let us bring about not just a national revival, but a true religious national revival. Signed, Chaim Abu Lafia. You know, he could have written these words today, not in 1913. We're in the year 2024 today. Today, it's not just Avadim and Ashkenazim. We're broken up into so many different divisions. I think we still don't heat up food in each other's ovens, and we still don't trust each other's shechita. We, I'm collectively speaking for the Jewish people, not we inside of this Beit HaMikdash. When I look at the writings of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine, I look at Rabbi Chaim Abu Lafia, I look at Rabbi Avraham Chacham earlier, and I see all of these Chachamim who had a vision, a dream, a plan. The plan was, exile is over. Chavra, Yom HaShoah was yesterday. Yom HaAtzmaut is right around the corner. We have our own homeland today. We're fighting for it like we never had to fight for it before. But we are going to win, B'ezrat Hashem. The physical part of the story, fine, it's happened. But what about the spiritual part? It's almost ironic. I'm going to say one last thing. It's almost ironic that it's Dafka, specifically the Jews who are religious, who still maintain this divide the most. I'm not telling you there is no racism between Ashkenaz and Sepharad in the state of Israel. I'm not going to tell you that no problems exist. I'm not talking about that. But your average guy in Tel Aviv and Haifa, and I don't know where he doesn't say, I can't go to the Ashkenazi pizza store. I don't go to the Sephardic wedding. There's no such thing. Dafka by the religious Jews. I go to the Sephardic Bedin, I'm the Ashkenazi Bedin, I'll need this Shechita, I'll need that Shechita. It's a Hasidic Shechita, it's a Sephardic Shechita. The whole day, we are still maintaining these divides. Who? We the people who believe in the Nivuah of our prophets. We the people who believe in the message HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave us. There's one Torah for all of the Jewish people. So it's incumbent on us, if we continue to go forward with our plan for national revival, to get rid of all those divisions. And Hashem is my witness. Every single thing that my wife and I do together at Shiviti, we do for that purpose. If we talk about Sephardim or Ashkenazim, it is never for the purpose of deprecation. Chas v'shalom. It is only for the purpose of how long will this embarrassment hang over the Jewish people like a shameful mark. It's our, forgive me for the borrowed term, it's our scarlet letter that we wear. And some of us wear the name of our galut so proudly. So proudly, I'm Sephardic. I'm so proudly to be Ashkenazi. Chaver, just be proud. I'm a Yehudi. I'm an Ivri. I'm an Eved Hashem. That's what I am. I'm part of my nation. I'm a Yisraeli. Be proud of those things. Bezrat Hashem. והוא רחום מכפר עוון ולא ישחית. והרבה להשיב אפו ולא כל חמדו. ואתה תקום תרחם ציון כתר חננה כי והמועד. It's a time. It's a time to have compassion on Am Yisrael. We say the time for our redemption has arrived. The time for our redemption cannot possibly arrive until the time for our unity arrives first. Bezrat Hashem. And next week we're going to discuss solutions to that in the writings of Rabbi Shemtob Gaguine.